Longines patented a trademark comprising its name in 1889, and the now famous winged hourglass. To date, Longines is the oldest trademark or logo still in use in its original form, fusing history and innovation always flawlessly. Longines has impressed its world by releasing new, unconventional watches since its inception.
In the early 1900s, a question was asked to the American public. And the question was simply, what watch brand would you choose if price was no option? Now, Patek Philippe unsurprisingly arrived at the top spot, but in close second, it was not Omega, it was not Rolex, it was Longines. And Longines of that time, between 1910 and 1940, created some of the most incredible watches. Not only some of the best chronometer-rated movements, the best chronographs, but the beauty was that it intersected so well with aviation pioneering of that age. So not only did you see this brand of watch on the wrist of famous aviators and those who broke the world records, but also by the fact that these watches were so well advertised and, we could say, hyped for the time. The marketing material aimed to promote these machines, as well as, we could say, the same kind of affiliation that NASA has with the Speedmaster, promoting these watches on a daily basis, pushed the public to look at them more frequently. And those decades of pioneering aviation feats and that history associated with their watches, they created such icons of the time, all found in their museum today. They have the best back catalogue of design properties. Now, as a brand today, quite different to a brand that it was 100 years ago, it's a maker that offers some of the best value for money watches. And when it comes to the workhorse movements that they provide and all of those specifications, they are some of the best, no doubt. We see this with their heritage department and how they create these one-to-one homages of the originals. We look at how they push the technology further by coming up with new designs. And we've also seen a keen interest in the Spirit collection. We could call these homologated designs, where they definitely lean heavily on the heritage department, but include things like ceramic bezels and different sizes, proportions, materials, to give the brand a more modern edge, saying, we know we have a great history, but we also want to keep it relevant for today. Now, we've seen great developments in the Spirit collection. The standard time variation, the time and date variation with a steel bezel, the Spirit chronograph with a tri-compact dial arrangement, a lot of modern features, modern innovations. Most recently, the Spirit Zulu time, which also has that cliched buzzword attached to it, true GMT. One of the most affordable, but also allowing you to adjust the GMT hand independently. This is a great complication. So this year, the watch that debuted is the Spirit Flyback Chronograph. Amongst us enthusiasts, it hasn't made much of a splash. Plenty of good reasons why, which I'm going to get into, but also the fact that it deserves to be appreciated for what it is, for what it represents, Longines as a brand. At the same time, it has many issues with its design. One foot planted firmly in the heritage side, the other foot planted in the modern side, with no knowing where it should go. It doesn't have a clear image, motivation, or direction. My job is to look at all of this, break it down, share what I think should have been done, how this complication should have been introduced. And I think realistically it would have made a far more successful watch that would appeal to both enthusiasts and new time buyers. Has to be said from the very beginning that Longines invented the flyback chronograph. I mean, it's an amazing complication. It was something that was created in conjunction with pilots back in the day. And the whole theory was that you could reset the chronograph much faster without having to stop and reset it independently. It was a 10-year development between 1925 and 1935 until Longines finally filed the patent. And during this time between the 20s and the 30s, they created the 13.33 caliber, which they put in a few great watches, and then the legendary 13ZN. This movement and its association with Longines chronographs, it's the most collectible of the Longines movements today. And like I said at the beginning of the video, this period in time, with names like Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart, Howard Hughes, they all wore Longines watches, and this so well coincided with the innovation of the chronographs and the movements that they were creating. Not only some of the most beautiful watches of the time, I would say of all time, but also the fact that they were tied to these legendary names. So with Longines now reintroducing their new flyback caliber in this modern Spirit collection, it's a novel idea. It's been a long time since we've seen this complication implemented. But I think there's more than one contributing factor as to why this has been quite an unsuccessful launch. And first and foremost, the flyback chronograph complication is a serious novelty item. It's not something that your everyday consumer even knows or cares about, so it shouldn't necessarily be debuting in a commercialized product. But then adding more fuel to the fire, there's lots of other elements, like the fact that it's a bicompact style arrangement. The fact that it's 17 millimeters thick, we will talk about that in a moment. The fact that it's a fairly large size that most wrists can't really sport. The overall design execution, yes, very similar to the Spirit collection, we could almost say exactly the same, doesn't come across exciting and doesn't necessarily portray the significance of such a movement. And if I am to go further into it, the 5 stars on the dial is a detractor for a lot of people. A dive style bezel, a timing bezel is period correct. It is pretty good for the modern day wearer. But at the same time, it feels like it can conflict with the dial and its configuration, though it is far more practical. I would say a GMT bezel would probably suit the complication of this watch a bit more. And there are other things they could have done. The colorway could have gone with a ruby red instead of your standard blue and black variation. I think my hot take around this watch, the reason why it has lacked impact for us as enthusiasts, is it just doesn't have punch. It doesn't show off what it's trying to represent well enough. The thing is, I love Longines as a brand. I gave the Zulu Time a spirited, see what I did there, review last year. It was one of my favorite releases of the year, and this flyback chronograph just doesn't fall into that category. Let's get back to the hotly debated talking point, the thickness, 17 millimeters. I think there should be a limit for all manufacturers to adhere to, that 15 millimeters has to be the maximum. It's getting to a point now where so many brands are pushing for the technology and making their watches thinner, some are continually making them thicker for no reason. I point your attention to an example like the Hanhart Flyback Chronograph. This watch doesn't sit that high on the wrist, has all of the capabilities of a flyback complication. At the same time, it's far more wearable. You take the Spirit Flyback Chronograph, you remove the rotating bezel component. That reduces its thickness. You get rid of the clear case back. Since it's a vertical clutch movement, it's not exactly the most appealing to look at. You put a solid case back on the watch, and you remove the automatic rotor. That will bring this watch down to at least 15 millimeters in thickness, maybe even less. My suggestion would be to release this watch with a white dial, with gilt lettering, gilt surrounds. It would look beautiful. But to create the hype and the buzz around a product like this, to debut a novelty item as important as a flyback chronograph now in a modern Longines, it should have been a part of the Heritage Collection, and it should have been the original 13ZN chronograph that a movement like this would debut in. Take the Avigation IDGuy case, slap a white dial on it, put the new movement inside it, maybe remove the automatic rotor componentry to make it thinner, and there's your answer. It would not only make a splash and make a big dent amongst us enthusiasts, but it would also appeal to the new time buyer because it's special, it's bespoke, it's its own product. I believe the reason why this watch failed to impress us is that it is very thick, especially for what it is. The complication is a serious novelty that does not appeal to a lot of people. It's not exactly the most effective chronograph when you can only time 30 minutes in the first place. And not even a date complication included to make it a bit more interesting. But it also lacked any unique punch, any USP to make this piece truly stand out amongst the rest of the Spirit collection. And it's funny to say, it's a piece that definitely deserved more as well as it deserved less. It deserved less filigree, more focus on just how this watch was going to be packaged and presented. My only hope is that we see this caliber now used in the Heritage department one day soon, revitalizing and bringing back the 13ZN flyback, a true legend, beautiful in its simplicity, timeless in its elegance. The Spirit collection, though it is a tight family, I think it also deserves to branch out a lot more. Without diversifying and branching out, keeping it in the family often results in a weak chin.